With the invention of the automobile and road systems, transportation and ease of mobility has greatly increased in our society. With this new technology and speed also comes great risk. In the US, fatal crashes peaked around 1980 with 45,000 people dying from an automobile or motorcycle accident in a single year. Over time, as people learned, they began to put a bigger emphasis on safety, and those numbers began to come down.
In this slide, we can see a very brief automobile safety timeline that shows the legal and technological changes that cars have gone through since their invention to the present time. For example, in 1861, speed limits were developed. In 1934, GM performed its first crash test. In 1959, the seatbelt we now know, the three-point safety belt, was invented. 1962, the first seatbelt laws were established. Towards the late 1970s, the airbags were introduced, and in the mid 1990s, side airbags for further protection. In 2009, thanks to the technological advancements, automatic braking was introduced to the world of cars. The improvement of safety features in automobiles led to the same developments in the motorcycle industry. Here we can observe a short timeline regarding motorcycle safety after their invention in 1885, with features such as: in 1828, the first front-wheel brakes were offered. The first patented protective helmet came into the market in 1953. By 1958, rear suspension was introduced, which helped a lot with rider comfort. And in 2015, 47 states and the DC area have already established different helmet laws. As you can see, many new technologies have been implemented to make driving or riding a motorcycle a safer experience. Despite all of these new safety features, cars are still a much safer form of transportation compared to motorcycles. Several reasons for this are: motorcycles are primarily used for recreational purposes instead of necessity, so they have less stringent regulations. Also, there are no seat belts or safety cages in motorcycles that will protect the user in case of a wreck. Here are some statistics about the topic. There are about 8.5 million registered motorcycles in the US. In 2013, there was 4,668 fatalities and 88,000 injuries caused by motorcycles. State legislation differ in every state, which is an important factor to take into account because some states only require the use of eyewear instead of helmets. As we can see below, there are some motorcycle-related deaths and injuries compared to automobile crashes. The fatal crashes in motorcycles, the number is much higher than the fatal crashes in automobiles, whereas the injuries in automobiles is higher than the injuries in motorcycles. This is important to take into account because there are about 130 million cars registered in the US compared to the 8.5 that are only motorcycles.
Here we have a graph for passenger cars, of fatality rates per 100 million miles driven, over time. It is important to compare fatalities to miles driven because someone who owns a car may drive it a lot more than a person who owns a motorcycle, so this puts the statistics in a relative frame of reference. Looking at the graph, the fatality rates were the highest in the late 70s and early 80s. Over time, there's a steady downtrend in fatalities with only about one fatality per 100 million miles in 2013. Next, we have the graph for light trucks, which includes SUVs and pickup trucks. Trucks tend to follow the same trend as passenger vehicles with just a slightly lower fatality rate across the board, hinting that larger vehicles may be safer for their passengers. Finally, we have the graph of motorcycle fatalities. In the 70s and 80s, the death rate was higher than 50 deaths per 100 million miles, and reached numbers close to that again in 2005. In 2013, there were still over 20 fatalities per 100 million miles, which is far greater than passenger cars and light trucks. Safety is a big concern in today's society and in the development of transportation infrastructure, so it is always important to be cautious as a driver, passenger, or pedestrian, especially when dealing with motorcycles.